You're listening to Talking Law, the podcast where business owners just like you discover how to avoid legal landmines and build value using smart legal tips.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to Talking Law, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, welcome to the final half hour of our exciting two-part series with Michael Maguire, all about the topic of leadership. Last week, we talked about leadership in the context of building a high-performance culture and environment for your team. In today's episode, we are delving deeper into leadership and into its role in business relationships and developing communities. We're also going to discuss Michael's work with an amazing organisation, Caritas Australia, a part of Caritas Internationalis, which is one of the world's largest and most effective emergency response networks. Caritas Australia is able to respond whenever disaster occurs through working with local partners to provide emergency relief to affected communities. You may be wondering why we are talking today about international charities. As we go through our discussion with Michael, I think it will become clear how this can become relevant to anyone who is involved in business. In fact, anyone who performs any role of leadership within an organisation in relation to how that leadership can transcend into leadership within communities. I think this is a really important topic. I know it's not strictly related to legal topics, but I think it's really important for understanding the fundamental connection between organisations we are building and the community within which we're building them and the broader community as a whole. So if you're a team leader in your business or organisation, this episode is for you. Here we go. This podcast is listened to by many business owners and, business owners are leaders in their own right. I think some of the things we'll talk about today are, perhaps some things that might be relevant for them to consider as leaders. But I think also one of the things we're talking about here is the benefit in people who are leaders, whether that's leaders of an organisation or leaders of a team as you were yourself, an obligation to something greater than just the entity that you're part of as well, I guess. The benefit that leadership can extend to if you look at leadership in the context of community rather than just the organisation that you are involved with.
Something that I've sort of always done is I've always enjoyed probably attaching the community to the club. And, inside communities, everyone's facing a bit of adversity. So, especially in and around Redfern, whether it was the Indigenous community or other charities that were required, and sometimes it was the homeless. I enjoyed watching whether it be the players or the club itself continually going out and doing things inside the community that helped the people that might be at need or even, and one thing sport does bring is it brings happiness to a lot of people, no matter where you are, whether or not you're very financial or you don't quite have a lot of money, is that sport can bring people together and it doesn't matter who you are. There's no discrimination about when you enjoy supporting one team, and I think that's what really brings the sporting notion together to support your own team. But how you tie that in, I'm happy to do that as well. Yeah, and everyone looks at leadership in a different light, but I guess for myself, I see it from an opportunity to influence, and influencing in my field is obviously the players to develop into great people first, and then the playing side will sort itself out from their natural abilities of being able to teach them how to play in a better way. But it's also being able to influence your own team to influence the community. So when I first came back to the South Sydney team, one thing I noticed that in and around the South team is that everyone really was living in a lot of hope. The fact that, they've been telling me ever since I arrived that it's been 41 years and it was 42 years and it was 43 years before. So it was something that, you could actually see the community really wanting, and not so much just the community, it was every supporter everywhere you went around Australia. I think the fact that the story of South, where they fell out of the competition and then they came back into the competition and everyone probably had a bit of a soft spot for that club.
Yeah.
But it was actually watching people change over a period of time from living in hope to actually believing that, they have a team now that can win, and then seeing that team actually cross the line and get the trophy was something that was probably in some way as big as being able to stand there with my players, but to watch the community just have so much joy off the back of a moment in time. And I remember sort of walking around the field after the boys had won, and it was just watching the people in the stands, and it was actually generations of people coming together due to the fact it was so long that South had been at that pinnacle again for 43 years. So you've had from grandfathers and grandmothers to their daughters, their sons, to their grandchildren, and if not, sometimes it was another a level of one down to bring their great grandchildren, and you could actually see in the stands how people were coming together. So it wasn't so much just around the win of having your team. It was actually the community that really enjoyed in that moment in time. And to hear the stories now after is that the influence that that moment in time had on so many families. I think that is what is so special about being in a leadership position like I was. I was just to be a part of that, but a part of a group of people that were able to create that for other people. Within a club, I think there's always something greater than yourself, and to be able to give back to the people around you always tends to come back and find you in a good way. And I found that if I have that philosophy in and around a team, that the team itself gets so much joy out of being able to do the things it does each day, but the joy it actually gives to the community outside is probably so much greater at times, because that's what people are living. They live every day of their life for their team or for whatever it might be that they focus on. And coming back to South in 2012, that I came to in that moment in time to a team that was really hungry for success, and they'd been waiting for 41 years, and I got reminded of that many times when I first arrived, and I knew there was high expectation around what they wanted to achieve, but along the way I probably didn't realise at the time the significance of what this club and what South played on people. And as the team grew, the support came, and you could really see people's lives changing and their weeks changing because they hadn't felt success for quite some time. So the expectations grew within the team, or around the team, I should say.
Maybe we can use that to transition a bit as well to your post-Rabbitohs days, and I guess also moving on to some of your work with Caritas, which is, I think, a great example of leadership within a community. So how did your work with Caritas start? How did you first find out about them?
Along the way, I happened to meet many great people, many great supporters that were along the journey, and I came across a young lady by the name of Sister Ivy, and she was a fanatical supporter of the Rabbitohs. She used to actually sit in front of the coach's box, and when we won, she was cheering, but when we lost, it was quite an interesting look I used to get many times from many supporters, but Ivy was one of them. But over time we grew a strong relationship and a bond, and it wasn't until I sort of asked Ivy, I said, what do you do? And she sort of mentioned that she likes to travel around the world and help the poor. So I thought, wow, that's a pretty unique job to be able to go over and do that. And from there, I found out that she was wound up with Caritas Australia. And through our chats over a long period of time, every time we'd win, she'd come up and have a good chat about what she's up to and where she's been around the world. But it was obviously when we lost, she used to come and give me a bit of advice about how the team was going. It sort of grew from there, and it wasn't until the back end of my time at South that she said, look, would you like to come over and come and see what I do? And I think it was probably a little bit of a throwaway line at the time, not thinking that it would actually happen. And I said, yeah, I'd love to come. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, next thing she said, look, I'm booking on, you can come with me. I said, why not? I'd love to be able to come over and see what's going on the other side of the world, and see in a country that is probably not in the same position as what we are. And I think through my journey at South of being able to be embedded in the community, through the Indigenous, through many different cultures within that area, you really get an understanding of the vast difference between everyone. Everyone's living in a different situation, but I think from my time at South is that whether or not you're doing it really well or you're doing it a bit tough, it always brought people together. And that was the great part about the sport, is that it always bring people together, which in our case was Ivy. And, I was fortunate to then jump on a plane and go over to Zimbabwe, where it was an enormous eye-opener and probably an enormous impact on how I felt about helping people.
Let's take a short break. And when we get back, Michael will delve deeper into his experience working with Caritas Australia and the reflections he brought home from his trip to Zimbabwe. And that's next. I'm Joanna Oakey, and you are listening to Talking Law, a podcast proudly brought to you by Aspect Legal. Are you looking for a top quality legal team to assist you in your organisation? Aspect Legal is an innovative commercial legal practice that specialises in providing fast and professional services for their clients. Our commercial legal services cover a wide spectrum of disciplines: contract law, dispute resolution, business sales and acquisitions, brand protection and IP. We work with clients both large and small, and we're all about helping you grow while protecting you from the unexpected storms of business. If you'd like to chat about how we might be able to assist you, simply head over to our website at www.aspectlegal.com.au to book in time for a free discussion with one of our legal eagles. So get in touch today. Welcome back. Earlier, Michael talked about the power of sports as a tool to bring people together and to bring joy to the community. He also drilled into the idea of viewing your leadership role as an opportunity to influence people and to give back into the community. We then heard Michael's story of how he started working with Caritas Australia, which is an international aid and development agency. Now, let's jump back to our conversation with Michael and explore his work with Caritas and his reflections on his trip to Zimbabwe. Maybe talk us through that. What was the impact? What did you see that, created such long-lasting effect on you?
Yeah, I think I first landed in Wangi, and I couldn't believe how welcoming the people were. And they came up and they were so excited that you're actually there, and then you looked around and they actually had nothing. They had to walk for 5 kilometres to go and get water. So they didn't have crops, they didn't have food, and there were actually people in those villages that were struggling actually to live. But it was really interesting or fascinating to see how happy these people were. So I guess one thing it does, it puts great perspective on, the stresses that we put on ourselves at times, and the desire of the things that we want in our life. Whereas it was just it was actually really refreshing to be able to walk into this village and see the smiles and just how grateful we were that Caritas Australia was actually coming. They couldn't believe that people from Australia were actually coming to their village. So you could sort of really sense that. And I guess that they're the sorts of things that you get out of when you're walking into a village and people don't have water, they don't have food, but they have each other. And I guess hence the reasons why I really enjoy working in teams, because it is about the people and the people coming together, and the fact that they wanted to improve their environment. And it was through sort of Caritas's programs, which obviously I've learned a lot more about since my time meeting Ivy, is that it's not so much about what they give, it's about how they educate them to get better. So they provided the ability to be able to get, and this is where all the money comes from, the donations. And I always was intrigued by where does all this money go when it's raised to these charities, and the influence it has on so many people in these countries. It's enormous. I mean, there were hundreds of people in this village and they didn't have water and food. But from Caritas entering into these villages to be able to help them just actually get water through the bores that they provide allows the communities to start growing. And from the water, they can then grow food. From the food, then goes on to help the people actually have a better lifestyle. rather than having to walk 5 kilometres one way to get water and then 5 kilometres back, it actually gave the people in the village so much more time back in their day.
Wow.
So that then gave them the ability to be able to go and spend more time growing their crops. It wasn't so much that Caritas actually gave them all these things, it's how they educated the villagers to be able to do it themselves. So it was an ongoing process rather than just one-off, this is what we're going to provide you with. So the programs were excellent to watch how all of a sudden they've had crops, better lifestyles, but what it was about being able to then sell off that food to be able to provide for their kids to go and get education. Yeah, and you could see within each of the villages that we walked in and out of is that they all had an understanding about what they needed to do was to try and educate their young kids, because they knew if they could get that education, they would be able to get to a better place. And that was something that I really took from, it's a bit like growing a business. You start from scratch, but I saw it in real life, obviously, around how they built these communities of people that were actually dying in these communities because they didn't have water and food, to, as we travelled from village to village, the programs that I was able to see was the stepping stones of where they're at as they progress through. So the first village was, it was very tough viewing the fact that these people didn't have a lot. And then we went to another village that Caritas Australia had been in for quite some time, and you could just see these great crops, and they were able to actually sell their food to be able to then provide more cement, even just to be able to build a dam. So, the fact that it was a starting point of one bore created the ability for these people to go on to send these kids to schools was, it was a great experience to be able to see this.
It's amazing. It's amazing because, I guess, we talked a little bit about the concept of dealing with adversity before, but it's fascinating, isn't it? I think probably any listener to this podcast at the moment, if they're reflecting on the issues of adversity they're seeing in their life at the moment, probably would say it probably doesn't come anywhere near the level of, obviously, the adversity you saw in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, we definitely build a lot of adversity between our ears.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as a leader, to be able to impart that to your staff that it's not that bad.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one to always try and impart inside your organisation, but sometimes it's taking a step back and realising where you're at. And for me, yes, I finished up at South and I ended up travelling across to Zimbabwe, and you look at what people have on the other side of the world and to see what they face, but also knowing that they're actually still really happy.
Yeah.
We tend to build a lot what's between our ears about what's happiness and what's not. So, again, it plays a big part in the mindfulness of everyone and, how we feel about our daily routines. We arrived at a school in Guera. In that school, you could just see a group of kids running around having a great time. And I was lucky to take over a couple of rugby league balls, and I didn't produce that at the start. And the kids were all running around, and they all came over and they welcomed us, and they explained how the fact that they had a brand new toilet, an outdoor toilet in their school, and they were so excited about the fact that they had this toilet. And it was really interesting, sort of just getting an understanding about what they appreciated due to the fact that they didn't have a whole heap at the school. And I walked back over to the car and I grabbed the football out of the car, and you could just see hundreds of eyes basically just connect with myself. And as I walked over, all the kids started walking towards me, and I threw this ball up in the air, and the whole school went absolutely crazy. They were running around, and the smiles and the laughter. And I stood there and I could not believe that these young kids had never seen a football before. They'd never seen a soccer ball, and they didn't have the sporting equipment that we always strive to have inside our households or at schools. And it was great to see that just something as little as a football, what a rugby league ball did to this school. And we sat around passing that, and they played for over an hour. And I left the football with them. And when we drove away, you could still see this whole school still throwing this football around. So it was. It goes to show how little you might be able to give, but how great it is within a school environment or a community. How much it impacts the people
such a big impact from something that we would see as quite small, a ball. That's just amazing. What a great story, Michael. I'm really grateful for the discussion that we've had today, because I think it really shows that leadership has so many dimensions to it, and as leaders within an organisation, we also need to recognise ourselves as leaders within a community as well.
Yeah, I've always found, I think, as a leader, if you can build a really an enjoyable environment, it allows people to grow and express themselves. And yes, that's an art, obviously, to be able to do that. But when you go and see what I was fortunate enough to go and visit, the fact that there were young kids. I'm not sure if you would like me to delve into that one, but there's young kids that were in safe homes, and arrived in Harare, and they were trafficked from Mozambique, which is 300 kilometres away. So these poor kids are taken out of their families and then basically put on the side of a road in a bus stop. And some of these young people will go off and be young slaves, sex work, all sorts of different things, which really puts a fair perspective. Then that's a 5-year-old. That was a young 5-year-old when I first walked into this safe home. And for the programs of what Caritas Australia are doing, allows these kids to actually have a safe place. And from being a 5-year-old in this safe home to whether it's an orphanage, there were 61 children in that same predicament when I first arrived there, within that the safe home. That safe home then allows these young people to go on and get schooling. From the schooling, they go on to actually be able to live a great life of education and the ability to help their communities grow. But these young kids will never ever see their parents again. They never have a birth certificate, so they really don't know their own identity of where they've come from. They have no family. So, when you're talking about adversity, I think, there's some incredible stories that when you're reflecting on what you're going through at that moment in time.
Yeah. Gosh.
I think that really brings back relevance to where we are.
And so I guess, how can our listeners help? So we've talked a little bit about Caritas and some of the things that Caritas does. And right at this moment, probably at the time that this podcast goes live, Project Compassion will be winding up. But maybe if you can talk just a little bit about what Project Compassion is, and then just generally how businesses maybe can interact with Caritas.
Yeah, I think Project Compassion, which I've been very fortunate to be a part of, as Caritas have been out helping raise funding for the people that I've spoken about. Project Compassion is a moment in time where they can really have a focus around helping out, I guess, the less fortunate. And whether it's around Project Compassion time, Caritas are always obviously looking for funding. And I guess I can definitely vouch for the fact that where their funding is going is helping out hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, because I know they're in many countries. They're spread right around the world, and it's not so much just, I was very fortunate, I guess, to have an experience in Zimbabwe, but there's many other places around the world that are going through these situations. And now that I've got a lot more of an understanding about what Caritas do, it's saving and helping, giving people opportunity to so many people that don't have the things that we do. But I always go and reflect on the fact that they're still happy people. And I think inside the leadership that we've discussed throughout this podcast is that leadership is about people. Leadership is about the influence that we can have on them. And I've been very fortunate to be able to have Sister Ivy come into my life to be able to take me over and experience what people, how they live their life when they actually don't have anything, but still plenty of happiness.
Well, look, Michael, thank you so much for your time today. In the podcast show notes, we're going to put some links to Caritas. So you as listeners, if you want to help with some of the projects that Michael has been talking about today, that you can get involved. And I guess just as a bit of a brainstorming, some of the things that perhaps you could do as a business, and something that we've recently implemented is thanking referrers by making a donation on their behalf to communities who could use the funding, and there's ways I think that you can be a leader of something greater than just your organisation, but within your community, if you just maybe stop to think about the impact that you can have on the communities around you. So thank you, Michael, so much. Let us know if you have any other ideas for businesses on how they can get involved. But I guess just heading along to our show notes and clicking over to Caritas and finding ways to donate is one of the easiest and simplest things we can impart on our listeners out of this.
No, great. Thank you very much, and really looking forward to hearing how people respond, and look forward to them growing within their own businesses.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Michael. What a great story. And hopefully out of this, we have more people who might get involved in some of these really important projects. Well, thanks for joining us in today's episode of Talking Law. This wraps up our two-part series with Michael Maguire on the topic of leadership and the opportunities it can bring both within your organisation and within the wider community. As a quick recap, in part one, we talked about leadership in the context of building a high-performance culture and environment for your team. Michael walked us through the ways he achieved this for the Souths. These concepts are universal and relate not just to sport, but also to businesses, organisations, and life as a whole. If you didn't catch part one, don't worry. Simply head over to our website at talkinglaw.com.au. And then today, in part two, we talked about leadership and its role in building relationships and developing communities. We also heard Michael's story of how he got involved with Caritas Australia and the impact these projects have made to some of the world's poorest and most abused populations. At Aspect Legal, one of the main pillars of our business is that we care deeply for our clients and the broader community. To celebrate each time we start working with a new client, each time someone refers us a new client, and each time I send even an email out of my inbox, we are donating a part of our legal fees to fund various projects, as well as conducting a larger fundraising project towards raising funds for a slum in Manila in the near future, which we will release details of very soon. If you're interested in being a partner in this endeavour, please get in touch with us today. You can shoot us an email at inquiries@aspectlegal.com.au or use the contact page on our website at aspectlegal.com.au. Well, these last two episodes have been a little bit of a change in direction, but hopefully you found them useful, interesting, and full of information that feeds thoughts for you of your position of leadership within your own organisation and within the community. In our next podcast, we're getting back to talking about law within business. So thanks for listening in for this and our last podcast. We look forward to joining you for future podcasts on Talking Law, a podcast brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Talking Law. Tune in next time for more smart legal tips and tricks to keep you clear of those legal landmines. If you want to get a download of today's show notes, head over to talkinglaw.com.au.
Are you looking for a top quality legal team to assist you in your organisation? Aspect Legal is an innovative commercial legal practice that specialises in providing fast and professional services for their clients. If you'd like to chat about how we might be able to assist you, simply head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au to book in a time for a free discussion with one of our lawyers.